There's a specific kind of silence that settles into a house after its master is gone. It's not peace. It's a weight. It presses down on the floorboards, sinks into the upholstery, and muffles the sound of your own breathing. For 3 months I had been living inside that silence. My name is Claire, and for 10 years, I believed my marriage to David was a well-designed masterpiece. He was an IT specialist, a man of quiet logic and steady habits. Our life in Portland, Oregon was a grayscale photograph, calm, predictable, and beautiful in its simplicity. He died on a Tuesday. They called it a cardiac event, a string of sterile words that meant nothing. One minute he was complaining about a server migration at work, the next he was just gone. My younger sister Lena was my rock. She's a therapist and she moved into my guest room the day after the funeral, armed with soothing teas and clinical grief counseling terms. "It's important to allow yourself to feel the void, Claire," she'd say, her voice a soft professional balm. She was right, of course. But the void wasn't just sadness. It was questions. How can a man who calibrated our smart home's thermostat to the exact degree suddenly have his own system fail so catastrophically? I started cleaning, organizing, trying to impose order on the chaos he left behind. His office was the hardest part. It was a fortress of solitude I rarely entered. I was packing his books into a box when our elderly neighbor, Mrs. Holland, stopped by with a casserole. She patted my arm, her eyes filled with genuine pity. "Such a good man, your David. Always so busy." She sighed, looking out the window towards the back of our property. "It's strange, you know. I haven't seen his car heading down the old service road on Saturday mornings anymore." I froze, a dusty copy of Moby Dick in my hand. The service road? It led to a row of rundown pre-war storage units nobody had used in years. "He went there?" I asked, trying to keep my voice even. "Oh, every weekend. Like clockwork," she said, oblivious to the bomb she had just detonated in my quiet, orderly world. Said he was storing old project hardware. A man needs his space, I suppose. Later that night, after Lena was asleep, I found it, tucked away in the back of his desk drawer. Beneath a pile of expired warranties was a single unlabeled key. It wasn't for our house or our cars or his office at work. It looked old, industrial, and suddenly I knew exactly what door it was for. The key felt heavy in my hand, heavier than a small piece of metal had any right to be. For 2 days I didn't touch it. I left it in the drawer, a sleeping dragon I was afraid to wake. My sister's voice, a constant, gentle presence in the house, echoed in my head. "Don't rush the process, Claire. Healing isn't linear." But her therapeutic words now sounded less like comfort and more like a diversion. A beautifully articulated command to stop asking questions. Was she protecting me, or was she protecting his memory? On the 3rd day, I made a decision. I am a graphic designer. My entire career is built on looking at pieces of a puzzle and arranging them until a coherent image emerges. David's life, once a perfect, seamless vector, now had a jagged, broken path. And I had to follow it, even if it led me off a cliff. I waited until Lena left for a yoga class. I didn't tell her where I was going. The lie came easily, a bitter taste in my mouth. Just going to the art supply store. The storage facility was exactly as I'd pictured it. A sad, forgotten place on the edge of town. Rust bled from the corners of the corrugated metal doors. Weeds grew in defiant clumps through the cracked asphalt. It smelled of damp earth and decay. My hands trembled as I slid the key into the lock of Unit 27B. It turned with a painful grinding sound, like a joint that hadn't been used in a decade. I heaved the heavy door upwards. What if this was all just a misunderstanding? What if inside was just a pile of dusty old computer towers, and I had spun a whole drama out of a neighbor's rambling comment? First glance, it was exactly that. Nothing. Just dusty boxes labeled old tax records, a worn-out armchair, and the faint smell of mothballs. My shoulders slumped in a wave of relief that was immediately followed by a pang of foolishness. I felt like a detective in a cheap novel who had just accused the innocent butler. I was about to close the door, to bury my suspicion forever, when my designers I caught an inconsistency. A single box tucked behind the armchair was different. It wasn't a standard cardboard moving box. It was a black plastic storage bin, the kind meant to be airtight. There was no dust on its lid. I dragged it out. It wasn't heavy. Inside, nestled on a bed of yellowing newspapers, was a single object. An old silver laptop. It looked ancient, but it was clean. Too clean. I opened the lid. The screen flickered to life, asking for no password. The desktop was empty, except for one icon. My blood ran cold. It was a compressed file named simply private.zip. A single file. That's all it took to hold the ghost of a 10-year marriage hostage. Private.zip. The name was so simple, so generic, yet it felt like a locked door I was never meant to find. I didn't open it there in the cold, damp air of the storage unit. This felt too sacred, too dangerous. This was a secret I had to confront within the walls of the life David and I had built, even if those walls were about to crumble. I drove home in a daze, the old laptop sitting on the passenger seat like a silent accuser. Every red light, every passing car felt like a judgment. Was I the naive wife, the last one to know? The thought was a hot spike of shame in my gut. When I got home, the house was still empty. Lena hadn't returned. The silence I had once found heavy with grief now felt thick with conspiracy. I sat down at my own workstation, my sleek modern Mac a stark contrast to the clunky silver machine I placed beside it. This was my domain, my place of control. If I was going to dissect a lie, I would do it on my own terms. I moved the cursor, my hand steady despite the tremor in my soul, and double-clicked. A password box appeared. Of course. Another layer, another lock on a life I was never a part of. I tried the obvious first. His birthday, our anniversary, his mother's maiden name. Access denied. Access denied. Access denied. Each rejection felt like a small personal betrayal. Then, a memory surfaced. A silly, whispered conversation from years ago, about the golden retriever we'd get when we retired. We had even named him. I typed the name into the box, my fingers fumbling. Sundance. The progress bar appeared, and the file unzipped. My breath caught in my throat. 2 folders materialized on the screen. Images and ledger. My heart hammered against my ribs as I clicked on images. It wasn't what I expected. There were no romantic getaways, no candlelit dinners. It was something more domestic. Dozens of photos of a woman with kind eyes and a tired smile. Her name was Ella, according to the file names. And with her, in almost every picture, was a young boy. They were at a science fair on a little league field, blowing out candles on a birthday cake. David was in some of them, standing slightly off to the side, a proud, avuncular smile on his face. He looked happy, a kind of relaxed, unburdened happy I hadn't seen in years. My hands shaking, I clicked on the ledger folder. It was a spreadsheet, meticulously detailed in a way only an IT specialist could manage. Monthly transfers. Thousands of dollars. Every single one labeled ES Education and Support. S. Ella Stevens. For the last 8 years, a significant portion of my husband's income hadn't been going into our joint savings or his retirement fund. It had been going to them, to her. I stared at the screen, at the face of a stranger, and the numbers that proved my entire life was subsidized by a secret. The question wasn't just, who are they? It was, who was I? I must have sat there for hours just clicking between the photos and the spreadsheet, the face of a woman I'd never met, and the numbers that unraveled a decade of my life. When Lena came home, she found me exactly like that, illuminated by the cold blue light of the laptop screen. Her cheerful, "I brought you a latte," died on her lips. She saw the open laptop, and for a fraction of a second, I saw something flicker in her eyes. It wasn't surprise. It was recognition. She put the cups down, her movements slow and deliberate. "Claire, what is this?" she asked, her therapist's voice already taking over. I didn't answer. I just turned the screen towards her. The silence stretched, filled only by the quiet hum of the computer. Lena sank into the chair beside me, exhaling a long, mournful sigh. She covered her face with her hands, then looked at me, her eyes glistening with manufactured tears. "Oh, Claire, I'm so sorry. I prayed you would never find this." She didn't ask where I found it. She didn't ask what it was. She already knew. That was the first red flag. "Who is she, Lena?" I whispered, my voice hoarse. "Her name is Ella," she began, taking my hand in hers. Her skin was warm, a stark contrast to the ice in my veins. She was David's biggest regret. It was years ago, before he even met you. A brief, intense thing that he ended. He said he wasn't ready. She squeezed my hand. The boy is not his son. Ella had him with someone else years later. But David, he carried this profound guilt, Claire. He felt responsible for her struggles. So he helped her. Secretly. It was a perfect story. It was neat, tidy, and it painted David not as a cheater, but as a flawed, honorable man. It made sense. It was a version of the truth I could almost live with. Why didn't you tell me? I asked, the last thread of my hope clinging to her answer. This was her moment to shine. She looked me straight in the eye, her expression a perfect symphony of pain and love. Because he made me promise not to. He told me in confidence years ago. I saw how happy you were, how complete your world was. How could I detonate a bomb in the middle of your happiness? All for a ghost from a past that had nothing to do with you. She shook her head, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. I made a judgment call. The wrong one, maybe. But I did it to protect you. She was good. She was a professional. She took his secret and reframed it as her burden, her sacrifice. She made me feel guilty for even questioning her. I nodded numbly. I let her hug me. I let her close the laptop, shutting the ghost back in its box. But later that night, as I lay in bed, one thought kept circling in my mind. Her story wasn't a confession. It was a closing statement. It was too clean, too rehearsed. It was the performance of a lifetime. And I, her only audience, had just given her a standing ovation. For the next week, I became an actress in my own home. I smiled when Lena brought me tea. I nodded when she talked about the stages of grief. I played the part of the grieving sister, slowly healing under her expert care. But on the inside, I was a detective hunting for a ghost. Her story was a fortress, perfectly constructed, but every fortress has a flaw. Mine was a single nagging question. Why was her performance so flawless? People who are telling the truth for the first time, especially a painful truth, they stumble. They hesitate. They contradict themselves. Lena had done none of that. Her monologue was a finished, polished product. It was the kind of speech you rehearse in the mirror. The thought chilled me. The breakthrough came from the most mundane of sources. I was in the kitchen, staring blankly at a pile of mail, when Lena walked in. "Echo," she said to the small, cylindrical device on our counter. "Play some calming classical music." The virtual assistant chirped in acknowledgement and a soft piano melody filled the room. And that's when it hit me, a jolt of ice-cold clarity. That device. It was always on. Always listening. It was an objective, impartial witness that couldn't be charmed or manipulated by a therapist's soothing tone. It was a black box recorder for my entire life. My heart pounded with a new kind of energy. It wasn't grief. It was purpose. I waited, every minute in agony, for Lena to leave for an appointment with a client. The second the door closed behind her, I was at my computer, logging into our shared smart home account. I navigated to the device history, my hands shaking. "Activity log," the screen read. I started scrolling back. Days, then weeks. Most of it was painfully mundane. "Echo, what's the weather?" "Echo, set a timer for pasta." "Echo, who won the Seahawks game?" A wave of foolishness washed over me again. What was I even looking for? Was I so consumed by suspicion that I was now looking for conspiracies in a grocery list? I was about to close the browser, to resign myself to the neat, tidy story my sister had handed me. But then I saw it. An entry from 3 weeks ago. October 25th. I had been out all afternoon at the lawyer's office. The log showed a different kind of activity. Not a question but a command. "Echo, call Ella Stevens." My screen froze, my own reflection staring back at me, pale and horrified. It wasn't just a recording of ambient noise. It was a phone call. A phone call Lena had made, using my device, when she thought she was completely alone. My cursor hovered over the small play recording button. A single click stood between me and a truth I suddenly wasn't sure I was strong enough to hear. My finger trembled for a second, then I clicked. The sound that came out of my speakers was thin, tinny. It was the sound of a phone call, slightly distorted by the virtual assistant's microphone. First, a woman's hesitant voice, gentle and confused. "Hello." And then another voice. My sister's voice. But it was a version of Lena I had never heard before. Gone was the warm, therapeutic cadence. This voice was cold steel, sharp, clipped, and dripping with an authority that bordered on contempt. "Is this Ella Stevens?" Lena asked. There was no preamble, no courtesy. "Yes, who is this?" Ella's voice was faint, wary. "How did you get this number?" "My name is unimportant," Lena said. A statement that was both a lie and a terrifying truth. "I represent the Carter family estate. I'm calling to inform you that following the death of David Carter, the informal financial arrangement he had with you is now terminated. Effective immediately." I felt the air leave my lungs. Informal financial arrangement? She made it sound like a business transaction, a soulless corporate memo. Terminated. Ella stammered. "But the support, it's for my son's school. David promised." "David is gone," Lena cut her off, her voice like a razor. "And his obligations died with him. My sister, his widow, is grieving. She is not to be burdened by the loose ends of his past." Loose ends. She had called a woman and her child loose ends. My hand flew to my mouth, a silent scream trapped in my throat. This wasn't protection. This was a purge. "But I don't understand." Ella's voice was pleading now. "Can I just talk to Claire? She would understand." And then came the final killing blow. The sentence that would replay in my mind for weeks to come. "Let me be perfectly clear." Lena's voice dropped, low and menacing. "You do not exist in Claire's world. If you attempt to contact her in any way, you will ensure that you and your son receive nothing. Not one more cent. This call is your final courtesy. Do you understand?" The line went dead. The recording ended. And the only sound in the room was the frantic, ragged sound of my own breathing. It wasn't a half-truth. It was a whole new war. A war I never knew was being waged on my behalf. Against people I didn't even know. Lena hadn't just hidden a secret from me. She had actively rewritten history. She had played judge, jury, and executioner, all while holding my hand and telling me to breathe through the pain. And in the deafening silence that followed, I heard a new sound. The sound of a key turning in the front door. Lena was home. The sound of the front door closing was like a starter pistol for a race I didn't know I was running. "Claire? You home?" Lena's voice floated in from the hallway, warm and familiar. The same voice that seconds ago on a recording had been a weapon of ice and steel. My body went rigid. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to scream, to hold up the laptop like a shield and demand an answer. But I didn't. Somehow, in that split second, a cold survivalist part of my brain took over. I slammed the laptop shut. When Lena walked into the living room, a grocery bag in her hand, she saw me sitting on the couch, staring into space. "Hey, you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost," she said with a small, concerned laugh. "Oh, I have, I thought. And she has your face. Just a long day," I managed to say, my voice a stranger in my own throat. I was looking at some of David's old files. "It's harder than I thought." The lie was effortless, and that scared me more than anything. "I told you not to push yourself," she said, immediately shifting into therapist mode. She sat beside me, placing a comforting hand on my knee. Her touch felt like a spider crawling on my skin. I had to get out. I had to breathe air that she hadn't contaminated with her lies. "I think I need to get some fresh air," I said, standing up abruptly. "Maybe drive down to the coast for a bit." "That's a great idea," she said, her smile never faltering. "Do you want company? We could go together." It wasn't a question. It was a test. To see if I still trusted her. To see if her performance was still working. I had to use her own language, her own weapons against her. "Thank you, Lena, but no. I need to be alone with my thoughts. You know, part of the process." I saw a flicker of something in her eyes, annoyance? Disappointment? But it was gone as quickly as it came. "Of course," she said smoothly. "Whatever you need." The moment I was in my car alone, the mask shattered. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there, gripping the steering wheel, my knuckles white. The world outside my windshield was a blur of autumn colors, but all I could see was the calculated cruelty of my own sister. She hadn't just lied. She had orchestrated my reality. She had curated my grief. I couldn't confront her. Not yet. You can't fight a master manipulator head-on. She would just twist my words, my pain, and turn it back on me. She would make me the villain of my own story. No, To fight a lie, you need something more powerful. You need the complete, undeniable truth. There was only one person left who could give me that. I pulled out my phone, my fingers flying across the screen back to the activity log. I found the entry. I found the number she had called. Ella Stevens. My finger hovered over the screen, no longer trembling. The time for passive grief was over. I pressed call. The phone rang twice, each electronic tone a lifetime. I was about to hang up, to retreat back into my shell of uncertainty, when a soft voice answered. Hello. My throat was dry. Is this Ella Stevens? There was a long pause. Who is calling, please? The voice was guarded, laced with a fear I was beginning to understand. My name is Claire, I said, the words feeling foreign. Claire Carter. I was David's wife. The silence that followed was so absolute, I thought she had hung up. When she finally spoke, her voice was a mere whisper. I'm sorry, I can't talk to you. I was told not to. I know, I said quickly, my own voice gaining a strange urgency. I know you were. The person who called you, who threatened you, it wasn't me. I heard the recording. It was my sister, Lena. Another silence. This one was different. It was the sound of someone processing an impossible piece of information. Your sister. Ella finally breathed out. But she said she was from the family's estate. She lied, I said simply. And with those two words, the dam broke. Ella's story tumbled out, not in anger, but in a wave of sad, weary confusion. She told me everything. How she had known David years ago, when he designed a community center where she taught pottery to kids. How he saw she was a struggling single mother and, out of what she could only describe as pure kindness, set up a fund for her son's education. He never once crossed a line, Claire, she said, her voice cracking. He always spoke of you. He called you his anchor. He said you were the most decent person he had ever known. A fresh wave of grief, sharp and complicated, washed over me. He had lied to me, yes, but he had been loyal to the idea of me. He had built a wall to keep his world separate, and in doing so, had honored both in his own broken way. Ella then described the phone call from Lena. Her voice was so cold, she recounted. She made me feel like I was trash, like I was some scheme David had been running. She told me if I ever reached out to you, she would paint me as a gold digger and extortionist. I was terrified. I just wanted to protect my son. We were two strangers on a phone line. Two women from two different worlds, connected by the kindness of one person and the calculated cruelty of another. I apologized for what my sister had done, an apology that felt woefully inadequate. She, in turn, offered her condolences for my loss. It was the most surreal, heartbreaking conversation of my life. When we hung up, I sat in my car for a long time, the engine off. The truth was finally whole. It was ugly and beautiful and devastating all at once. Lena hadn't just been protecting a secret. She had been actively trying to poison it, to twist David's kindness into something sordid. Why? So she could be the only hero left in my story? The rage I felt was clean and bright, like a flash of lightning. It wasn't the messy, confused anger I'd felt before. This was clarity. I now had the one thing my sister couldn't manipulate or therapize away. Someone else's truth. Rage is a fire. But when it burns long enough, it turns into something else. It turns into fuel. I drove home from my meeting spot with a chilling sense of purpose. The grief was still there. A hollow ache in my chest for the man I thought I knew. But now it had a partner. A cold, diamond-hard clarity. Lena's story wasn't just a lie. It was a carefully constructed fiction, and I was about to become its editor. I had Ella's testimony. I had the voice recording from the virtual assistant. But I knew my sister. A therapist. A master of words. She could twist anything. She would claim she was being firm to protect our family's assets. She would say Ella was a delusional woman trying to extort a grieving widow. I needed more. I needed something she couldn't spin. I needed her motive. I needed to know why. That's when I remembered the final piece of the puzzle from the storage unit. The old notebook with a cryptic line scrawled in David's hand. Backup email. Email address / pass. Jay's first cat. J for Julia. My first cat. A fluffy Persian named Jasper that I'd had in college. A detail so personal, so deeply buried in our shared history, that no one else could possibly know it. I logged in. The inbox was a digital graveyard, full of spam from a decade ago and notifications from long-dead social media platforms. It was a time capsule of a life before me. I went straight to the search bar. I typed in one word, Lena. Dozens of emails appeared. I started from the oldest ones 5 years ago, and I began to see the pattern. It wasn't overt. It was a slow seeping poison. An email from Lena after David and I bought our first house. It's beautiful. Claire is so lucky. She's always been so lucky. Another, after David got a promotion. It must be wonderful to not have to worry about money. Some of us have to fight for every scrap. It was an endless litany of passive-aggressive jealousy, a victim narrative she had been spinning for years. And then I found it. The one that explained everything. An email from 6 months before David died. He must have just told her about funding a summer arts program for Ella's son. Lena's response wasn't just bitter. It was venomous. So you're funding his future while I'm still paying off student loans. I am your family, David. Not some charity case you feel guilty about. Not even Claire, who has had a perfect life handed to her on a silver platter. You have no idea what real struggle is. But you will. Someday, everyone will see who the truly devoted one in this family is. There it was. The motive. The rotting core of her entire being. This wasn't about protecting me. It was about her own deep-seated, pathological envy. She didn't want what I had. She just didn't want me to have it. I saved a copy of the email. I saved a copy of the voice recording. I had the truth from Ella. I now had the motive from Lena's own words. All the ghosts were finally unmasked. All that was left was to arrange the funeral. I invited her for tea the next afternoon. The scene was a perfect replica of a dozen others we'd shared since David's death. The same porcelain cups, the same calming chamomile tea, the same sisterly affection. Except one of us was an actress, and the other was about to have her world dismantled. Lena was in her element, talking about a new mindfulness technique she was using with her clients. I let her talk. I watched the way her hands moved, the way she tilted her head with practiced empathy. I was studying a predator who had forgotten she was no longer camouflaged. Lena, I said, cutting through her monologue. My voice was quiet, but it sliced through the air like a scalpel. Her smile faltered. I need to show you something, I said. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I simply took out my phone. Lena watched me, a flicker of professional curiosity in her eyes, still believing she was in control, still thinking this was about my grief. She thought she was the therapist. She didn't realize she was the patient. I spoke to Ella, I said softly. The name hung in the air between us. I saw her jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. Claire, I advised you against that. She's not stable. She's not the one who isn't stable, I replied, my eyes locked on hers. I also found an old email account of David's. I opened a file on my phone. I found your correspondence. The mask of the therapist finally cracked. Fear, raw and ugly, flashed in her eyes before she could suppress it. That's an invasion of privacy. Whatever you think you found. I don't think, I said. I know. And then I did something she never expected. I didn't play the voice recording. I didn't show her the screenshots. I pressed a button on my phone, and a cold, robotic text-to-speech voice filled the quiet room. It began to read her own words back to her. So you're funding his future while I'm still paying off student loans. Not even Claire, who has had a perfect life handed to her on a silver platter. Someday, everyone will see who the truly devoted one in this family is. The computerized voice was devoid of emotion, and that made the venom in her words 1,000 times more potent. Every word was a nail being hammered into the coffin of her lies. Lena stared at the phone as if it were a snake. The color drained from her face. The performance was over. The curtains were down. And she finally broke. It wasn't a quiet cry. It was a raw, ugly sob of pure rage. You always had everything, she screamed, the therapist disappearing completely, replaced by a bitter, jealous child. The perfect grades, the perfect house, the perfect, doting husband. You have no idea what it's like to be second best at everything. To be the supportive sister in the shadows. I deserved something. I deserved to be the one he turned to. I stood up, the teacup rattling in its saucer. I looked down at the woman who had shared my childhood, my secrets, my grief. And I felt nothing but a vast, empty pity. The tragedy was never about what David did, Lena, I said, my voice calm and final. The tragedy is that you've spent your entire life hating your own, because you were too busy coveting mine. I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her there, choking on a truth that was entirely of her own making. I didn't wait for her to leave my house, because it wasn't my house anymore. It was a stage, a beautifully decorated set for a play whose run had just ended. I walked past the living room, not even glancing in at the wreckage of the woman who used to be my sister, and went straight to my office. My movements were calm, deliberate. The fire of my rage had burned out, leaving behind a strange, serene clarity. There was one last piece of business to attend to, one final thread to tie off. It wasn't for me, and it certainly wasn't for Lena. It was for David. For the part of him that was kind and decent, the part that had gotten lost in a labyrinth of his own making. I opened my email. I composed a new message to Ella Stevens. The words were simple. Ella, I wrote. For what it's worth, I am truly sorry for what my sister did. David spoke of you with nothing but respect. Attached is a recording that I hope brings you some measure of peace. I wish you and your son all the best. Claire. I attached the audio file of Lena's threatening phone call, and I pressed send. It was an act of justice, not revenge. A quiet correction to the historical record. Then I began the digital amputation. I opened my contacts and deleted the entry for Lena. I went on social media and blocked her profile, her carefully curated life of inspirational quotes and smiling selfies turning into a gray, inaccessible void. I logged into the smart home account and revoked her access privileges, one by one. Each click was a quiet, methodical snip. I wasn't burning a bridge. I was simply acknowledging that the bridge had never really been there in the first place. After that, there was only one thing left to do. I went to my bedroom and pulled a single suitcase from the top of the closet. I didn't pack memories. I didn't pack framed photos or sentimental objects. I packed 3 pairs of jeans, a few sweaters, my work laptop, and a single paperback book. I wasn't escaping a life. I was packing for one. Suitcase in hand, I stood at the front door and took one last look around. At the perfectly placed furniture, the tastefully chosen art, the life that looked so complete from the outside. And I realized the truth. This house was never my home. It was a beautiful, comfortable cage David had built to quiet his own guilt. And the key I found in his drawer, it was never the key to his secret. It was the key to my freedom. I stepped outside, pulled the door shut behind me, and for the first time in months, the click of the lock sounded like a beginning, not an end. It's been a year since I closed that door. I live in a small apartment now, 2 states away. The silence in this house is different. It's not a wait. It's space. Space for my own thoughts, my own breath, my own future. I never heard from Lena again. I didn't need to. I used to think revenge was about watching the people who hurt you burn. Now I understand. True karma isn't a lightning bolt from the sky. It's the quiet, personal prison they build for themselves, brick by brick, lie by lie. Her punishment is having to wake up every morning as Lena. I can think of no worse fate. And David? The anger has faded, replaced by a complex, bittersweet understanding. My suffering didn't just come from his secret life. It came from my own attachment to the perfect picture we had painted together. I wasn't just grieving the loss of a man. I was grieving the loss of a story I had told myself for 10 years. And letting go of that story was more painful and more liberating than letting go of him. We build our lives around what we believe to be true. Our marriage, our family, our friendships. We think these things are solid ground, but they are often just beautifully decorated stages. And sometimes the stage collapses. And when it does, we are faced with a choice. Do we try to rebuild the broken set, pretending the cracks aren't there? Or do we walk away from the rubble and find out who we are when we are no longer playing a part? I used to think the great betrayal was the secret he kept from me. Then I thought it was the war my sister waged against me in the shadows. But I was wrong. The greatest betrayal of all would have been to find the truth, and then choose to betray myself by staying. By choosing the comfort of a beautiful lie over the difficult, messy, and glorious freedom of reality. That's my story. And it's a story about losing a husband, and losing a sister. But more than that, it's about finding myself in the wreckage. Maybe you have a story like this. Maybe you've seen the cracks appear in something you thought was solid. Maybe you're standing at a crossroads, wondering if you have the strength to choose the unknown path. If any part of this resonated with you, I want you to know you are not alone. These are the kinds of stories we explore here. Not just about the pain of betrayal, but about the incredible strength it takes to heal. If you believe that truth, no matter how difficult, is the only way to be free, then I invite you to subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell. There are more stories to tell and more truths to uncover. Together,